and then black and white. And from those, I've made various colors, some lighter, some darker. Nothing too crazy here. This is just me color mixing, right? So it's the same thing that you guys did. And from there, I have created this particular painting. I'm not painting on anything special today. It's just flip chart paper, believe it or not. So when I do demos and stuff, I figure, why waste good quality paper if all I'm doing is demoing? But I started doing this exercise on Wednesday night's class, and it actually turned out really well. I'll do the demo today, and then as you guys are continuing to paint, I will paint on this one as well and try to come to some resolution on it. It may end up looking like a hot mess, but who knows? I've been trying to do these demos more frequently, just so that you can get some ideas of what the paints will do for you, but also what tools you can use to make interesting marks. That's really kind of important. So how many of you like this painting? Okay, cool. You like the color combination? The thing about color is this. You know, if I chose not to do this part of the exercise, we would never ever arrive at these colors, right? So it's really important to develop more sophisticated color palettes, and the only way that you can do that is by color mixing. So that's really important from the outset. As I said in the first class, hopefully by the end of this semester, you'll have 9 sets of these so that you can figure out like which color sets worked best for you, which ones you were really drawn to, which ones were a complete mess that you thought, ugh, I never want to do that again. Those are all learning opportunities for you, but you will never get there if you don't take this step. So that's really important in my estimation. So I'm going to work from these colors. We've got a combination of opaque colors here and transparent colors. The way that you know if a color is transparent or opaque is generally there's a little key on the back of some of these paint colors. If you are painting with student grade paints, which is completely okay for this class.
What's the definition of student grade?
Student grade, sort of like the Reeves brand for AC Moore, just sort of the low end kinds of paints. They may not have this key on the back, so don't be surprised if they don't have it. The best thing for you to do if you don't have it is just to take a pencil, make a few marks, and then add in some paint color on top of it. And if you can see the marks through the paint, then you know that it's transparent out of the tube. So here, it's actually transparent, but it's a little dark. So let me see if I can try this other one here.
Did you say it would be on the back?
Yes. Yep.
Gold, and it's sometimes on the front.
Sometimes it's on the front, yeah. No, it's right there at the back at the top. It'll say whether it's transparent, translucent, or opaque. Right? So if I had made these really dark, you could see through them, right? So these 2 colors are transparent.
That's the color.
I know that these 3 colors are opaque. And the reason why is because if I were to put them here, you wouldn't be able to see those lines. It would just cover them up completely. Does that make sense, everybody? So with that knowledge, you automatically have a lot of control and options that you have. Think about it this way. If I want to cover up something, I just use an opaque paint, right? But if I want to cover up something and I, by accident, choose a transparent paint, I can layer and layer and layer and layer, and you're still going to see what's underneath, right? So it will never, ever sort of obscure completely what's underneath. That being said, some of my paintings, I think the more interesting areas are those paints that are more transparent, because it shows what's underneath, and I want that to happen because I want you as a viewer to see those paintings and see, oh, there's something underneath there. It gives a sense of depth that you wouldn't get otherwise with just flat opaque paints. Now there's applications for both of those, but that's what I think is really important. So in this particular painting, if I want something to be on the top plane, we talk about planes a lot in abstraction. That feels like very frontal, very present, right? Whereas some of this in the background, some of these colors, they feel like they're further back, or they should to you. So that's how you can achieve that is through the knowledge of what's transparent and what's opaque.
So when you're starting to do your first layers, do you tend to use more translucent than opaque?
You can do either,
Okay.
but it depends on what your goals are. So if you really are wanting to add some depth, I tend to start with more opaque colors on the first layer, and then put transparent colors over them.
Okay.
And when you start to mix those transparents in with one another and layer them, you're going to start to get that sense of depth. There's something back there I'm seeing, but I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense? Okay. So the easier way, if you don't have a guide on the back of your paint, and one of the easy ways, rules of thumb is, if it sounds like it came from the earth or that it's naturally occurring, it's more than likely opaque. But if it sounds like a chemical made it, or a chemical was used to make it, it's more likely transparent. So something like this, anthraquinone, something like this, phthalocyanine, those types of chemical sounding names, quinacridone magenta, for instance, all of those colors are typically transparent. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule, but most of them you'll find that way. If it's just clearly Mars black or titanium white or something like that, those are always going to be more opaque. Anything like siennas or burnt umbers or any of those classic colors, completely opaque, right? So does everybody know how to make a transparent color opaque and vice versa? Opaque colors transparent.
I would imagine you'd add medium
Right, so that's one way to do it.
or water.
Glazing liquid is on your list of supplies, and that helps opaque paints become transparent without losing the pigment load, right? But if you can do the same thing with water, but just think about water and watercolors, right? So the more water you add, the more transparency you're going to get, but also you're going to degrade the pigment load, which means that they're going to become more pastel-like, more watery, and sometimes you want to maintain that color intensity, you just want them to be transparent. So in order to do that, you add the medium, the glazing liquid instead. That will help keep that intensity, but still make the paint transparent. Is everybody clear on that? Okay, great. And to make a transparent paint opaque, all you need to do is add a small amount of another opaque color. So you could add white, you could add black, depending on whether you want to go lighter or darker, or any of those like siennas or natural colors. They don't shift the color too much. The other thing to note is with black and white, their pigment load, both, but especially black, is very high. So it takes a very little amount of black to shift your color dramatically, right? So just keep that in mind. If your goal is to make a darker color and you're mixing 1-to-1 black with your color, it's going to be black every time because it's just the pigment load is really high for black. Okay, great. So with that in mind, how many of you feel like this painting is done?
No.
Okay, thank you. Because someone in my Wednesday class was like, I would hang that tomorrow. So the goal here is just because you cover the span of your canvas doesn't mean you're done, right? Sometimes people wonder, why is it that yours has a lot of layers and it's got some textural elements and things like that? And I tell them, it's because you don't have enough paint on the canvas, right? So that's really important. Just keep going. And that's one of the reasons why when I do this, I think of creating abstractions as a 3-step process. One is called play. And for those of you who have had my class before, you've heard this before. The play stage, for lack of a better way to put it, is very similar to when you were in kindergarten, right? When a teacher gave you a brush and some paint, you didn't say, well, what am I supposed to do now? Is it too heavy? All of those crazy things that run through your mind as an adult never happened as a kid, right? Somebody gave you a brush and a paint and you went, let's go, right? So that's the play stage. We want to try to get away from our adult selves, get out of that adult mindset of, clearly I don't know what I'm doing. It doesn't matter. So a couple of things in the play stage. One, I like to think of it as a term that I call seeing for the first time, every time. And what that means for me is I'm going to put the paint on, and then I'm not going to follow the temptation of, just because this shape is right here, I clearly have to do this shape around the boundaries of this one. I act like this shape doesn't exist, right? And it's this kind of a mindset thing. Even though I know it's there, I'm going to go right over the top of it, right? Because it doesn't matter. I'm not looking at this point for composition or how the colors are reacting against one another or where they're placed or how they go. I'm just putting paint on. So with that in mind, the other thing that I like to talk about in the play stage is that the colors can be whatever you want. And the brighter and the wilder, the better. And the reason why is because we know from the outset, in our adult mind back here, that by the time I'm finished with this painting, the majority of these colors are going to be covered up. Like I will barely even see them, right? That's in my mind. So I can go really crazy. I could just as easily add on a magenta in here at this stage, and I wouldn't worry about it, right? Or some color that's really odd doesn't really go with these, right? Because I know that eventually I'm just going to cover it all up, okay? So, with that being said, you get to a point in the play stage where you just don't know what else to do anymore.
And there's no rhyme or reason, you're just...
No,
Okay.
none whatsoever. I'm just like, if you've had a bad day and you just want to slap some paint on, if you had trouble getting over here through the traffic, if somebody said, hey, happy birthday, and you were elated by that because someone actually remembered that it was your birthday. It's not my birthday. But something like that, you can just throw on the paint however you want, however it works for you. And then from there, you'll get to a point where you say, I don't know what else to do anymore, right? And when that happens, I tend to that signals to me, and it should to you as well, that's when you're entering the contemplation phase, right? The contemplation phase is kind of like puberty. And you think to yourself, all of these new experiences are happening, and I don't know what's right and what's wrong, but maybe I should try to figure that out, right? And what that stage is, the contemplation stage, there are no right or wrong answers, right? So I can't tell you, you did this and you really should have done that. No, it's still you that's making those decisions, right? And in the contemplation phase, we actually don't do any painting. We're just looking, right? So I'm going to be looking at this in the contemplation phase and thinking to myself, okay, maybe I should start thinking about composition or color relationships. Does this color look good against that one? Or are there too many small sections here that are too distracting? Things like that can go through your mind in the contemplation phase when you're not painting. A lot of times I tell people, for as much time as you spend putting on the paint, you should spend at least that much time looking at it and trying to decide where you want to go from there. A lot of us just keep painting and then we muddy things up and it gets a little confusing and then we get frustrated, right? I would say stop and sit back and take it all in and look at it and make some decisions. And when you finally decide what 3 or 4 things you want to do with the painting, you're going to move from that contemplation phase into the resolution phase. And that's sort of like adulthood. We know what classic compositional elements look like. High horizon, vertical, S forms and things like that. If you don't know those terms, we will get to them, so it's not that big of a deal now. But you'll make some of those decisions and then you actually make them happen. And that's coming to some resolution. You start painting again, you start picking up brushes and making different marks. I talk a lot in this class about differences. Differences are really important in abstraction, and they're not only important for us as painters, but they're important for those people who view the painting. The more interesting it looks, the more interested they are, and they will stick with it. So, this one technically has a horizon line. It has something that sort of looks like trees. Those trees have within them a little bit of dripping. There are some tools that made this mark and that mark. There's some carandash in here. There are different colors that are poking out. Carandash? Carandash. So these are watercolor crayons. I'm borrowing these from Anne. Thank you very much, because I left mine at home, but we'll get to those. So different things, and there's also differences in opacity. So this is opaque, this is transparent. There's different strokes that occur up here in the technical sky, and then this is something that is drawn across with a tool. So all of these things start to work in tandem with each other to make it an interesting painting. Now, people often ask me, is there a successful painting? Do you know when it's a success? And I say it's personal for everybody. There is no right or wrong here. We're just making a set of decisions. That's it. So it's up to us how we finish off a painting. I work on canvas board. I work on wood panel, sorry. It's like canvas, it looks like canvas. The edges are painted when I get done. Sometimes I actually paint them ahead of time, and then I paint the picture on the front, and then if I have any paint splatters or anything, I'll sort of go over those and finish it up at the end. You would just wire it in the back, but the reason that I work on these is because the tools that I like to make these marks appear better on this surface than on a canvas. As you probably have explored so far, working on a canvas, you have a little bounce, right? That's stretched across, and it's taut, but the more pressure you add, the more bounce there is. With this, you're not going to get any bounce whatsoever. You get a lot of resistance. So I like it because in these paintings, as I work on them, I want that resistance. I use a pretty heavy hand when I'm painting, and so this gives me that resistance that I'm looking for. Because if I were bouncing all over everywhere, it wouldn't look like this. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. So with that in mind, are there any questions before I start this demo? John?
Yeah, just whether this play stage works well for doing semi-representational, I mean, less abstract, you still tend to do it,
Yeah.
if you're gonna do a landscape, things like that.
Yes.
Lay that stuff and you go over it.
I do. I tend to do that. This particular set of paintings that I've been doing recently are all sort of landscape references.